Okay, looks like we're live, and let's start this. First and foremost, really appreciate all the viewers tuning in today. We have a phenomenal panel. Really excited, and this is the third part to our mobility series that we put together. We started with micromobility, then we did the on-demand delivery space, and now bringing things to a full circle with the rideshare space, which is extremely interesting and really the cornerstone of the shared economy mobility space. And so really excited with the panel that we have here today. We're going to be discussing the titans of emerging industry, the shared road to success, a roundtable discussion with some of the most notable names in the rideshare and peer-to-peer space. I am your host, Eric Schneider. I'm a VP of Sales at FounderShield. FounderShield, we are a emerging insurance brokerage that focuses, within emerging industries, and obviously the shared economy mobility really falls within our expertise. And we do a great deal of focus within micromobility, on-demand delivery, and now rideshare. And so we take a unique approach where we leverage a lot of our back-end technology to facilitate and streamline processes for our clients and enhancing the overall client service experience. And we think that our focus and our ability to build out partnerships within the unique insurance space has allowed us to be very successful early on. Along myself, Justin Kozak, Will Hammery, and Alec Giacco, we are the premier team in our group that focuses in the mobility space. So we have 4 panelists with us today. We have Brian Allen from HyreCar, Clara Fain, CFO of VIA, Chris Moore, the head of Apollo, and Andrew Burns, General Counsel over at GetAround. So super excited, and wanted to kick the mic over to Brian Allen to give us a quick overview of HyreCar, and then we just have a few questions for you, Brian, to get things started.
Sure. So HyreCar basically is a digital online marketplace to connect vehicle owners, whether they're private peer-to-peer, commercial as like dealerships or rental agencies, or institutional where people have just bought fleets specifically to enter this business. So similar to an Airbnb model, we connect the asset, I should say the vehicle, people who need vehicles to the people who have them. And our marketplace is national. We are a publicly traded company, HYRE. And it's we fill a really unique niche for the people that need to rent a vehicle to participate in transportation as a service, whether it's rideshare, food, or package delivery. And that's the essence of it. My background came from automotive retail, general manager for over 33 years at Galpin Motors in Los Angeles. And I oversaw the luxury brands as well as our Japanese brands, Subaru and Mazda. And that gives me an interesting perspective, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, and that is how mobility really can be sustainable and grow through some of the challenges we have today with COVID.
Perfect. Appreciate that, Brian. And that's a great introduction. And I'd like to kick things off here by getting your thoughts on the collision of some old school and new school aspects of the industry. How do you think retail auto dealers effectively participate in mobility solutions moving forward?
Well, I'm very bullish on retail automobile dealerships and their participations in mobility. Matter of fact, I believe that dealers are in the best position to help sustainability and participate. And basically it's for a few reasons. One, dealerships already have the infrastructure. And I kind of learned a while ago that the person who owns the land controls the hand. And I think some that have struggled, Maven, some of the OEM programs, Maven, Canvas, a couple other manufacturers, they made a mistake because they didn't utilize the dealer's infrastructure. They had to recreate it, whether buy cars, manage fleets, buy real estate or lease it. And our whole business model is let's leverage people who already have the infrastructure, frankly, being paid for by their core business, so that when they enter mobility, it's truly plus revenue from assets they already have, or at worst, it offsets depreciation costs from assets they have waiting to be retailed or otherwise sold through subscription services. So dealers have typically, you talked about old school and new school, dealers traditionally have not made money, in essence, renting cars. Most dealers, and I can say very much firsthand, uh, renting is losing money because they're typically for service loaners and no revenue type reimbursement for their asset. And if anything, it's an absolute cost center. But now where people are willing to pay a decent amount of money for otherwise idle, underutilized assets, dealers are in the perfect position to do it. And what's changed today is telematics and some of the technology. What we can do with smartphones, with InsurTech, FinTech, telematics, all that integration into smartphone apps makes the resources to administer a fleet much less of a drain what used to be previously. And dealers, you got to make things simple, because contrary to some popular belief, dealerships still do a lot of business. And the vast majority of transactions occur in person. And when I say vast majority, over 98% of automotive purchase transactions occur in a physical location of a dealership. And certainly the vast majority of service transactions. Now, is it going to change over time? Certainly. Online digital retailing is growing, and COVID, of course, has accelerated that. But that's even more reason why dealers can get into mobility and offer their fleets. Also, something interesting, the dealer's part of the ecosystem to not only rent, but sell these drivers' cars. And to be very candid, one of HyreCar's challenges is that the drivers won't stay on the platform forever. They eventually buy a car. And now we are leveraging that by helping the dealers with these drivers to, in essence, create a path to ownership. And we call it earn to own, but it's a wonderful ability for a dealership to, in essence, create their own customer by first starting with mobility, renting for gig economy. They earn an income, then they save down payment, and then they either buy the car they're driving or they buy a different car from the dealer who's nurtured that relationship. And then, of course, they have service income and they can sell insurance. So the dealer participates in the whole ecosystem, kind of like from filet mignon to sausage. And that's why we are very bullish with dealers and rental agencies that have gotten on our platform and been able to leverage our unique technology as well as processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Brian, it's interesting, obviously your background primarily with, the more old school that we were speaking about, and
Yes.
seeing the value of what HyreCar can provide. It's really interesting. And I guess, in terms of HyreCar, what makes you guys a unique solution for the TaaS, transportation as a service rental industry?
So my opinion, from what I've seen, I've been with the company almost 2 years now, the unique solution we offer is driver supply. And, it's technology can be replicated. If technology is your only reason to be in business, you're at risk because others will come after you if you've got something that's working. But what we have that's really unique is the HyreCar name brand typically will come up first results on searches for rent for rideshare or rent for food or package delivery. And the HyreCar brand evolved of being, look, you have assets, whether you're peer-to-peer or you're commercial, institutional. We have the drivers that will use those, pay you well, and you will not only offset depreciation you're going to incur regardless, but you will have solid utilization, and then obviously the revenue that comes with that. So our unique model is we have over 50,000 on average applications a month for people to drive cars. Now, to be very candid, many of those don't qualify. We have a driver vetting process. So criminal background check, driver's license, things like that. But we've really got that difficult process ahead of the curve. And we have just under 100 people on our team that provide stuff that automation struggles with still today. But we have that high touch, high tech is really what I believe our competitive advantage.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, and obviously branding is huge in that aspect. And I think it's really interesting for those that aren't entrenched into the space, how much goes into the pure vetting that you guys likely do for drivers, and what that looks like. There's just people see, I think in the rideshare space, just in general, the consumer model, and they don't see everything else behind the scenes. And there is a lot in the supply chain. So it's really interesting for you guys to give that idea of
Focus.
what it looks like. Yeah, exactly.
And one point you just actually inspired is dealers and fleet rentals. They really appreciate the longer term rentals. Some more leisure focused are daily or maybe 2 days most. Our average driver is about 3 weeks on a vehicle, and that adds a lot of scale and economies. You're not changing cars every day. You don't have to use a lot of manpower. So the commercial use is consistent and reliable, especially in this food and package delivery environment we're in today. It's frankly saved our bacon. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue into my final question here. And obviously, when considering partnerships for HyreCar, obviously the knee-jerk reaction that most people think about is, rideshare companies. Obviously, that's why we're here today. But what other verticals have you considered working in, and what's the two-sided benefit of these new strategies?
Well, outside of the obvious, like to work with whether it's Uber, Lyft, or Instacart, Grubhub, and those. Probably what's important to say is our platform is agnostic. And that's really another competitive advantage in our segment, because some of the companies that have existed, like Express Drive, and that you have to drive for a specific TNC to qualify. And our drivers can start with Uber during the morning, work with Lyft, or do grocery deliveries if things are slow. So to go back to our partner alignment, it's everything about making it easier to do business. So for example, some of the major vehicle repair shops, whether franchises, I should say, whether it's Pep Boys or Goodyear, we work with partnerships there to allow our vehicle owners to get their vehicles serviced quickly, or if they have a policy with their drivers, to get the drivers at a convenient location for whether it's an oil change, tires replaced. It's now, of course, vehicle cleaning, very important. So we have services that will go to the vehicle owner or wherever the driver's located and do a vehicle heavy duty cleaning, and everything, again, mobile focused, go to where the client is. And it's constantly evolving. I'd be fibbing if I said we have everything figured out. It's a bit of a journey versus a destination. But I'll tell you, nothing like a crisis to get you kicking butt and making decisions. And that our partnerships are based on improving the experience for both our clients, the owners and the drivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously, everything that's going on with COVID has forced a lot of people to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So it's great to see that you guys are doing the same, and really, really appreciate your time, Brian, and the interesting insight that you had. Want to now segue over to the VIA team, and representing them today is Clara Fain, their CFO. Really appreciate you taking the time here today, Clara. And I know we spoke on multiple occasions, and happy to have you on our panel, and would love to just hear a little bit more about VIA for those who are not as familiar, and then obviously have some questions as a follow-up for you.
Sure, thanks, Eric. And thank you guys at Founder Show for organizing this really nice webinar. We're happy to be discussing with our peers, and it's definitely an exciting time to talk about transportation and ride sharing in general. So just, I'll start with a little bit of background on VIA. So I think we probably all agree here that, the transportation industry is multi-trillion-dollar market, undergoing once in a century transformation that represents really a singular opportunity and a very unique opportunity for disruption and rapid growth. Within the transportation industry, which is this massive TAM, we believe that innovation in public transit may hold the greatest promise for delivering both economic impact, which is obviously very important to us as a company, but also social impact, which has become, I guess, even more important than it was for VIA in this troubled times. And when you look at the overall transportation space, and that is massive, having identified public transit as a very impactful segment, in addition, within public transit, there's very limited technology penetration. And so, it holds really, it's a very appealing space. And that presents a great, a great opportunity for technology disruption and transformation, and has potential for mass appeal as, what we call public mobility. And so at VIA, it's a long way of saying that, at VIA, just to set the stage, since 2012, our mission has been to transform public mobility into a digital, connected, and data-driven service. So we've been building a technology platform that can be used by cities, municipalities, transportation operators, any kind of transportation stakeholder as their operating system to operate all sorts of transportation services. And we originally started with on-demand shuttles that we operated ourselves as B2C services. And over time, we have expanded into being really a tech provider for cities for on-demand shuttles, fixed route buses, school transportation, paratransit, and non-emergency medical transportation, and into multimodal apps and anything that relates to transportation. And so VIA is today really the world's leading provider of software, to public mobility players. And we're present. We have over 700 employees. We're present in over 20 countries through technology partnerships. We believe our technology enables a new and exceptionally efficient form of mass transit.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Clara. And it's interesting because I think when a lot of people think of rideshare, they always go to like the consumer model, right? But there's so many other layers within rideshare that people don't even know about, or they don't really know who's behind providing the service. So it's really interesting and to see how VIA has evolved over the years. And leads me to my first question. So VIA obviously has taken an interesting and differentiated approach to the on-demand transportation industry by leveraging best-in-class tech and infrastructure to become the leading software provider for public mobility. Can you explain how you choose different verticals you've elected to enter and kind of what your decision-making process behind that was?
Sure. Maybe an interesting story is, at VIA, when we started in 2012, in 2013, we started building software, and, we went to a very large transit agency trying to sell our software. And at the time, it was not so trendy to sell software to transit agencies. So the agency asked us to show data and prove that our software was efficient and could affect change in the transportation system. So we actually started operating our software, and we launched, the first what you call rideshare, the true ride-sharing service in New York City at the end of 2013, which was a very large kind of B2C service that took off immediately. It was if you guys are not familiar, a network of on-demand shuttles that aggregate in real time multiple passengers headed in the same direction. That's app-based, and our technology was dynamically routing those shuttles that are generally shared and highly efficient. And so we launched this B2C service and really started eating our own dog food in a way. And we built our software. We drove millions of miles, and our drivers and passengers were delighted by this efficient new form of mass transit. And over the next few years, between 2013 and 2017, we really built our technology platform thanks to that service, and expanded in a number of new cities. In 2017, after years of trying the market, started to feel ready for for technology, and we went back to our roots, and we went back to transit agencies, municipalities, and started to sell again and try to partner with them to enable them to operate better transit services. And that's when we really saw the curve change, and we started seeing real and tremendous adoption for technology at that time. And in the last 3 years, the adoption for technology by cities and transit agencies has been quite massive. And I think in a way cities are looking to technology to help them take control of their infrastructure. I think we've been talking about infrastructure and risk, and with technology there is a way to obviously provide better services, more cost-efficient infrastructure to people around the world, and that's what cities have been doing in the past few years. And the way we've expanded is really quite organically. We started with on-demand transit, which was shared rides, if you want, in large high-capacity vehicles, and over time we saw a demand for paratransit, which is really operating those the same type of service, but for a different population, and expanding into that. And over time, with our goal of building the platform for cities and public mobility, we expanded into school transportation. We won the largest contract in the United States with the New York City Department of Education for the nurses school bus system to power that system, and really continue to grow organically with our partners and city clients, and trying to help them solve their problems, with the goal that one day there will be a one unified platform, software platform, that cities can use to manage all their assets, be it school bus, a van, a fixed route bus, an NEMT vehicle, maybe at some point a taxi, a rideshare, a scooter, a bike, one platform that city can utilize to manage their road assets effectively and all their infrastructure.
Perfect. No, and really appreciate that that deep overview. And obviously, we all knew that COVID was going to be a very large part of this conversation. And so for VIA, how has COVID impacted VIA's consumer and software businesses, and how has VIA evolved to support different industries during this time of need?
Sure. So, on the consumer side of the business, obviously, as cities have been sheltering in place, we've seen a significant decline in ridership on that business, very similar to what, Uber and Lyft have communicated on in their, public filings. And, I would say we're focused on shared mobility. So in a way, sharing in the same, car has also been quite impacted. So on the consumer side of the business, the impact of COVID has been quite high, as you could expect. On the partnership side of the business, which is, the majority of our business today, the impact has been much more muted. And actually, we've seen a lot of demand from partners and cities for technology to help them, transition into this new world that we live in, with new security and safety measures, better tracking, higher focus on budgets and efficiency. And we've been able to roll out several of the essential services for essential employees across the world. We've rolled out, we've entered the logistics space and have rolled out several logistics services for some of our partners to deliver meals or goods. And I think we've continued to pursue our vision and our mission to really help our partners grow and solve some of their transportation problems. And while COVID, I would say, I think, if we take a step back, during all a major crisis, there's always a silver lining. And I think, with COVID, it's interesting to see that cities and transit agencies, and I think everybody else are, questioning things that were the status quo before, right? So the way transportation was run, prior to COVID, may change significantly with the crisis, and we think there's tremendous demand for technology and for innovation in this new world we're in, and so we're seeing that quite a bit.
Got it. Yeah, it's definitely accelerated things. There's no doubt about that. And to wrap things up here, Clara, what do you see the future holds for VIA? Are there any further evolutions you anticipate the business going through in the next few years? for instance, another vertical expansion beyond the consumer, TaaS and SaaS? How do you think about risk management specifically when deciding to expand your business as well?
Sure. Yeah, we've talked. We've talked a little bit about how we've expanded over time. With COVID, we've seen opportunities into moving, goods and packages, and we're exploring that. To help our partners. I think you have some, risk management experts on this call that, I will probably turn to. But, when we make a business decision, and especially in my role as CFO and working very closely with our, our legal and our legal team and our general counsel, we always take into account, business opportunity, how quickly we can get to scale, obviously profitability metrics and unit economics. And as well as risk management. And I think, evaluating, risk, within each vertical is a key component of us making decisions. And with that, I'll leave it maybe to your next speaker to touch a little bit more on risk as he's the expert.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Clara, and really appreciate your time and insight as always. But before we kick it over to Chris over at Apollo, just want to remind the viewers that we will have some time for Q&A. So in the meantime, if you have some questions, feel free to shoot those over, and I'll make sure that we relay those over to our panelists. And thanks again, Clara. And now, I think that's a great segue to our dear friends over at Apollo, Chris Moore. He is the head of the ibott division. ibott, specifically is insuring businesses of tomorrow today, and a lot of these panelists are very familiar with him, and I'm sure our viewers are as well. So glad to have you on here, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. It's great, I suppose, to be on a webinar with some great platforms, but proud to say partners of Apollo. I love the tagline of the shared road to success. That's very at the heart and the principles that we set ourselves, whether that's sharing information, sharing ideas. For us, it's all about collaboration, and it's all about partnerships in order to help people build trust within their platforms, which will ultimately, enable growth and territorial expansion. So with our global solutions, that's what we're trying to build. If I had to say what our mission was, it is to be disruptive in our own way. So the insurance industry certainly isn't as exciting or as cool as some of the disruption that's going on with my fellow panelists, but I can promise you it's not without its challenges. We're trying to change the stigma of insurance, so we're trying to be flexible, creative, and innovative, which I promise you isn't something insurance is known for today. So not an easy challenge we've set ourselves.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris, as always. And to kick things off here, a common phrase that we always hear within this space is vicarious liability, right? It's a huge, important topic of discussion within the sharing economy as a whole. And so how does Apollo look at direct liability versus vicarious liability? And how does that differ when looking at different mobility models, whether it be ride sharing, commercial leasing, P2P car sharing, et cetera?
Yeah, direct liability versus vicarious liability really do need to be treated separately. The insurance product for those different types of liability need to be different, and the control measures that a platform needs to adopt in order to sort of control that risk are different. And so the way that we rate them and evaluate a platform's ability to do that is again different. So starting with the rideshare sector, rideshare sector has a very set in stone now, certainly in the US, a TNC regulation. Most states have adopted some form of the National Council of Insurers regulation in 2015 that mandates that the platform must procure insurance on behalf of the driver, with most states adopting that $1 million limit for periods 2 and 3. So, that's very much the direct liability. When you look at then the vicarious liability, this is structured as excess cover for the platform only, sitting above, that direct liability for the drivers. And then when you look in the leasing and the peer-to-peer sharing, that's slightly different because there's not the same form of regulation that has a clear mandate on what the insurance needs to be. And actually, quite differently, some of the platforms in that space actually use insurance as a bit of a differentiator and use it as a bit of a sales tactic. So what you see is when someone comes to do a car share or a vehicle lease, they're normally offered some form of insurance embedded within that lease. And some platforms provide, minimum financial required limits, or sometimes people will offer top-up limits through the app, or go for, I'll give every person that leases a vehicle $1 million of coverage. And then when you flip to the vicarious liability product for that type of exposure, really you're talking about a Graves amended type product. So you've got that amendment. It's a federal amendment with Graves. I think it's been touched on quite a lot in some of the great Founder Shield webinars that have come before this one. So I won't touch on it too much, but that's very much looking at a platform's ability to control the person that's doing that lease and the vehicles that are being leased. So, a very different type of exposure and a different type of product. Just on the control measures, when you talk about the control measures, it's very much focused on the direct side to, the safety measures within the app, the driving behavior, how that's being monitored, and really preventing fraud and the onboarding process. The product you're giving then is insuring thousands of different drivers. Whereas that platform-only vicarious liability, you're only insuring one entity, being the platform. So you're looking at the platform's ability to control the risk on the underlying platform. So there, the focus shifts to one very much on background checks, driver vetting, and secondly, the vehicle maintenance, making sure that the product that's being leased is fit for purpose and in a good state of affairs. So that's how we look at them differently.
Perfect. And I think that's a great overview. And a difficulty that, or not a difficulty, but a hurdle that a lot of these companies face is, maintaining that quality of risk management service, as you grow and scale, right? And I think another thing with, you touched on, Chris, in terms of regulations, the difficulty with a lot of, these companies is the law changes dramatically so much, even state to state, city to city. So like, there's all of these different factors that just go into maintaining an insurance program that complies with all of these different cities as they launch and scale. So, but yeah, no, and it makes complete sense on, your analysis of direct liability and vicarious. Again, something that, we have to discern a lot with our clients and make sure that they fully understand the difference. So appreciate that. And so the ibott team, specifically at Apollo, like I mentioned, insuring businesses of tomorrow today, dealing with, a lot of creative business models. And, you guys have proven to be one of, if not the most creative insurance markets since stepping into the space. Can you discuss how your approach to rating or pricing rideshare and vehicle leasing risks, continues to change? And what are some of the current metrics you guys emphasize in order to best analyze these types of risks?
I think the creation comes from collaboration. So to Kara's point previously, when she was talking about unit economics, how that plays out with risk, really it's about what are the key metrics that the platform are looking at? Where are they looking to grow? How are they looking, to control their underlying pool? If it's all about growth focus, they're going to want an insurance product that caters for all different types of exposures. If it's really about focus on profitability, they're going to want us to create an insurance program that gives the cheapest possible insurance to the best risk and really loads up the cost for the worst risk. So you're almost using your insurance as, the ability to remove the poorer part, the things that aren't driving revenue and profit, and then, using your product to really incentivize more profitable growth in terms of the unit economics, so the rides or the leases that you generate the most amount of profit from. So what we try to do always with ibott is we embrace usage-based insurance products. So we're rating off, per mile or per trip or per rental day, something of that nature. So that's already very different to your traditional auto type insurance product. And then, you're looking at a number of different risk factors. So some are still pretty obvious and some are used in the traditional insurance world, like vehicle type or the age of the driver. And then, like you said, regulation changes by state, so we use state modifiers. But now it's about, there's a huge amount of data available to these platforms. And can we tap into that data? And can we look and see if there are new rating factors they're actually a better reflection of the exposures that these platforms are facing. And by tapping into that, we can start looking at, more granular rating that actually is a much better way to look at things and can improve unit economics. So maybe it's looking at driver tenure. So, if you're a rideshare driver, you're probably a different risk if you're in your first 10 trips than if you've done this 1,000 times. You know what the drop-off, you know the pickup, you know the routes that you're driving. That's got to play into the risk. So that's one of the metrics. Then you look at how vehicles have evolved with advanced driver assist systems. So if something's brand new, it's probably got lane detection software and lane departure software and all of those sort of things. That's got to be a better risk. Can we reward that in adding that into a rating factor? You've then got things like nighttime driving, big daytime driving. Can we split those rates? So if you're a food delivery platform or if you're rideshare, you may see a bigger growth post-COVID in those daytime type exposures. And we all know that nighttime driving is a lot more dangerous than daytime. So can we add that into our model? And then it's, urban v rental, highway v non-highway. There's a huge amount we can do by tapping into that data. But, that takes collaboration. That takes real partnership to take the product to the next level. So that's certainly what's on the roadmap for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it ties into, what Brian was speaking about on the onset, as it relates to telematics and companies' ability to track all that data and how useful that is for you guys. And it's interesting to see, how granular you really can get. And that's really important for insureds, right? To keep costs down as much as possible, to get as granular so you're not, blanketing, certain exposures, just looping them in together when they could, very well be split out and, be charged less. So that's super interesting. And honestly, for us, we've even seen changes over the last 3 or 4 years, as it pertains to rating bases and being able to, see that firsthand. So we can, specifically attest to that, working with Chris and the Apollo team. And my final question here, Chris, is, we were just speaking about technology and how it has and will continue to play a large role in the way that insurance companies collect and analyze data in order to best understand a rideshare or vehicle leasing risk. Can you share any new or interesting approaches Apollo has taken to integrating new technology to your overall underwriting or claims management practices? I mean, even for us, like we've seen a large uptick with, ancillary companies that are providing, plugins to cars to better track driver behavior. Like, have you guys looked into partnering with any sort of companies of that nature or any, I guess, new technology to assist you guys with understanding the risk better?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always open to partnerships with various different types of technology. If they're bringing new ways for us to look at risk, absolutely, the door is always open for those type of collaboration. I think telematics is obviously a big topic. It's been spoken about a lot, but for me, I kind of change the narrative when I'm speaking about telematics. A lot of people talk to me about, if I invest in telematics, how much money will I save? And I always try to shift people off and say, you're not thinking about it in the right way. What really you want to do is, how much control do I gain by telematics? So by understanding, driver behavior, which is what the crux of telematics is, you start to get a view on, well, if this person's a really bad driver, yes, I'm generating revenue if they work for me and I'm a rideshare platform. But if actually they're a massive loss cost generation from a claims perspective and they're driving my insurance cost up, I may not be making a profit on this person operating on my platform. So now with that new knowledge, I can remove them from the platform because they're not helping me gain, profitability. So when I talk about telematics, it's, can I create a program where I can risk score your drivers? And so your best drivers get the cheapest insurance per mile and your worst drivers get the worst possible, the highest cost insurance per mile. And then you as the platform have the control to say, I'm going to remove the poor drivers, or you may be in growth mode, and you're trying to capture market share and say, okay, we'll bear those insurance costs, but in the future, we might look at removing them. So for me, telematics is all about control. Some of the other technology that we're seeing is very much focused on GPS based. So it's at the moment, I'd say our rating models can tell you, we can look into the driver themselves, so who's driving. We can look into what car they're driving, so the what. But the where is something that we don't do a great deal on, if you like. We know which states they're operating in, but really what I want to get the crux to is, if someone goes from route A to B and uses these particular roads, are they the safest possible roads? Or could I build into a rideshare platform to say, actually, if you take a different route for A to B, I can actually discount your insurance by 10, 15, 20 points. And if the time is a minute or something like that, you can either pass that cost on to the rider, or you just build it into the app. So there's definitely evolution in technology that can help there. And then the final part for me on the claims management side is we're seeing a lot of evolution on the platform themselves, F&OL being through the app, so allowing first notice of loss. But the key part is really getting better with your claims data. So most platforms that I speak with are incredibly sophisticated in the data they have surrounding their exposures. It's just about linking them to claims. And once you've done that, you can pull out some real value, and you can start using that sort of information as fantastic arsenal to give to the Founder Shield team to start beating me up at renewals and saying, we need a cheaper rate. So that's what I'd encourage you to do. Get really sophisticated with your claims data, link it to exposures, and that's how we can, partner to evolve insurance programs.
No, and obviously insurance is only as good as the claims management, right? And I think something that's really true to that as well is the faster and quicker that you could better settle claims, payouts. Obviously, that helps companies with cash flow. It definitely, has a trickle down effect. So really appreciate your time, Chris, and interesting to see what you guys are thinking about on a move forward basis, and obviously as of today. And really appreciate you everything you guys do for us, obviously, and the rideshare community as a whole. So appreciate that, Chris. And now our final panelist. Really excited to have Andrew Burns, the Deputy and General Counsel, Head of Public Policy for GetAround. And thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. We'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and GetAround as a whole.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric, and to the whole Founder Shield team for putting this together. I feel like I'm truly batting cleanup because the bases are definitely loaded after those first three speakers. So a bit of pressure, but I'll do my best. So GetAround is a peer-to-peer marketplace platform that allows owners of cars to share them with those in need of getting someplace. So a couple distinctions that we have as a company. We allow folks to book cars by as little as 1 hour. So if you need to go to Costco and you don't want to, you don't have a car, but you need a large car to do that, you can do that with GetAround. If you need to go away for the weekend, maybe go on a date, and that car that you've been driving doesn't quite give the impression that you'd like to give, our platform has the cars that might give the right kind of impression. In any event, we operate in 300 cities in the US and Europe. And I think the key piece, and this goes to COVID, it goes to a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about, is we're a tech-enabled solution. I don't just mean it's app-based. That's par for the course these days. But we actually, each of the cars on the platform has a proprietary hardware device called the GetAround Connect in it, which enables someone to book, unlock, and drive the car away without ever having any physical contact with the owner of the car. There's no key handoff. And so you don't need to wait for that office to open in the morning. You don't need to wait for the person to come out and hand you keys. So it really does enable someone to, in the most COVID-friendly way possible, be able to utilize that mode of transportation. As for me, I think, as you noted, I'm Deputy GC and lead a number of functions at GetAround. This is my third mobility company. I was left another very large rideshare company in December, and before that was at a smaller rideshare company, and before that, government and law firms. But it's exciting to be in this space, and I think when we think about the future of cities, the future of the country and transportation, the conversation we're having today is right at the center of it.
Yeah, perfect. And interesting to hear, about your background, obviously, within this space specifically, and now your role at GetAround. And we all know that, GetAround has proven to be a successful peer-to-peer leasing company. And in order to be successful, what are some of the challenges you've had to face and overcome, both in the short term as well as during expansion efforts?
Yeah, for sure. So GetAround has been around as a company for over a decade. We launched in 2011. So GetAround launched before most of the titans of the mobility space, certainly on the ride-sharing side. And so, the fundamental issue, particularly back then, we don't think about it as much today, is do I trust the marketplace? Do I trust the platform? For most people, their car is their most valuable, or at least second most valuable asset. And so going from a place where, the same kind of question about do I want strangers, do I want to ride with a stranger in a car? Do I want to let a stranger, rent my home? Is the same kind of concern and behavior, consumer behavior that you'd confront in the car sharing space. Do I feel comfortable letting someone take my car? And so when GetAround launched, there were a couple key things that we did. One is we helped back legislation in California, where we started, to put together a framework, largely insurance-based, to be able to go to owners and say, this platform insurance will cover the car. You're not going to be able to get kicked off your policy just because you happen to be using your car at times for car sharing. So providing a sort of baseline of comfort and trust was essential then. It remains essential, but then more so because it was sort of a new concept. The other piece is we've always been tech enabled. I talked about it a little bit before, but it's always been really important for us to have internally with proprietary hardware that not only allows what I mentioned, which is the user to book, unlock, and drive the car away, but also gives owner confidence about where the car is. They can actually use it themselves, use that technology themselves. And so those are, I think, address the initial trust-related challenges and continue to allow us to expand the group of owners. As you think about expansion from there, as you're moving from sort of the early adopters to others, both on the owner and user side, a challenge that we face is we're hyper local. So it's to say that I live in suburban San Francisco. If you tell me, hey, there's a car available 5 miles away, I'm going to say it's way, way, way too far. I might as well go to the airport and get a traditional rental car. For our model, you need to think about when we're going to launch in a certain area, not, okay, are we going to launch in a market as a whole, but what are those sub-markets, so we can ensure that for owners, there's a market of demand for their car where the car is located, and for users to be able to find a car locally. And the other challenge that we need to face there is because we're tech-enabled, meaning there needs to be an installer, professional installer, to install the GetAround Connect device in the car. We also need to build that infrastructure, those installation shops around it. So the good news, I think, particularly these days, is that it's required us to have measured expansion. So while we do operate in the US in 13 markets and in Europe, we haven't been able to expand as quickly because you need that sort of core of supply and demand and those centers to install the hardware. But that's been in some ways a good challenge to have, and we've been able to grow notwithstanding those challenges.
No, that's perfect, and really interesting to see. It's almost like a market within a market, and being able to provide readable access to those users. So that makes complete sense. And in terms of your marketing efforts and how do you attract end users to adopt a new style of renting a vehicle and sort of shifting consumer behavior, and do you find it more challenging to attract suppliers or renters onto the platform?
Sure. A lot of it depends on where you are. So if you're in a city, Boston would be an example, where it's very expensive to own a car, God forbid you have to park at some place, there are fewer cars, and therefore it is more difficult to get folks with cars to join the platform. In a city like LA, for example, where everybody has at least one car, some even more, it's less difficult to get folks on the platform. But as I said, that trust through insurance, through the GetAround Connect are sort of part of what gets people comfortable with putting their car on the platform. And to be clear, the average GetAround owner is making depending on the market, $300 to $600 a month. So that pays for the car. So there's a tremendous sort of economic opportunity for owners, and that of course gives them comfort as well. On the demand side, again, it does depend locally. As I mentioned earlier, I alluded to earlier, there's, car sharing is particularly well suited for a number of use cases. There are obviously use cases where it's less useful. And so I think as people have gotten used to, more modalities of mobility, moving away from car ownership in many cities, they're much more likely not just to car share, but to take ride sharing, to leverage via and public transportation. I mean, once people's mind goes away from I have a car, that is the way I get everywhere, then things blow wide open. But it's going to take time, and in different places, the acceptance of that proceeds more or less quickly.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that growing populations are much more adept to the sharing economy as a whole. So I think that you're definitely starting to see that shift in behavior, like you mentioned, and it's interesting with the economic benefit for the suppliers that you mentioned, essentially paying for their vehicle by accessing the platform. So super interesting to see that angle as well. And in terms of the future, what do you see the world of peer-to-peer vehicle leasing looking like in 5 to 10 years? Are there some potential considerations, consolidation? Is it the new norm? Will there be autonomous vehicles playing into the equation? What do you guys see as the future?
Sure. Well, certainly, as I alluded to earlier, the expansion of sort of the mobility ecosystem, where people expect to have the right kind of mobility offering for what they want to do right now. And even you look at car sharing as an example, right? Today I need a certain type of car, and I can get that for a few hours today. I want to go away for the weekend, I get a different type of car. I'm certainly not wealthy enough to be able to buy all the different types of cars that would be ideal, let alone micromobility, public transportation, other options. So I think that will continue to grow. I think we will see, I don't know about consolidation per se, but I think we will continue to see more and more partnerships among different players and different aspects of mobility. I think we'll see more public-private partnerships. We, for example, have a partnership with the city of Salem, Massachusetts, where essentially we are the car share technology for their city cars that they're putting on the platform. So I think we'll see more and more things like that. And as I think smart cities and urban areas think more about how to better to leverage data, we see particularly tech-enabled platforms like ours playing a particularly key role there. One change that I think I'm pretty confident in predicting is, connected cars will be more and more ubiquitous. So today, the GetAround Connect is a proprietary device that we do install in your car aftermarket. I think it's likely that over time, devices like ours will be just, when you buy a car, it will be there. The means to share your car will be part of it. And so in terms of autonomous, I'm not going to be the first person in the last decade to say that there's not going to be autonomy in the coming 5 to 10 years. What that autonomy looks like is, of course, a question mark. And I think from if you think of sort of the mantra of ACEs, meaning cars that are autonomous, connected, electric, and shared, I think the shared is key to glean the environmental benefits, to glean sort of the smart cities benefits of this new technology of autonomy. I think sharing will be part of it. And we see the GetAround platform as being just as appropriate and vital to that sort of sharing as it is for sharing in a time where there are driver-driven vehicles.
Understood. No, and that's great insight. And Brian touched on it a little bit, but I definitely think there's some of the larger players, have not already or will be in the near future, starting to get into the shared mobility space, just in terms of shifting from, again, just purely purchasing a vehicle to a more shared approach, like you mentioned, being able to have access to all these different vehicles, not just one, and also not having the responsibility to maintain that vehicle, I think is huge as well.
Absolutely, Eric. Just one other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, GetAround was founded to solve the problem of we call car overpopulation, and most cars are idle for 22 hours a day. And so I think whether GetAround is the modality, or this is a huge problem that needs to be solved, and obviously there's going to be a lot of players continuing to solve it. But we can't have, cars for 22 hours a day in parking lots as cities continue to grow. It's just not feasible. So I think and this is why these kind of conversations are so exciting and meaningful, is I think we're all sort of focused on different aspects of trying to solve this problem.
Well, perfect. And really appreciate your insight, Andrew, and all the panelists. I know that we do have a few questions from the viewers, and want to shift the first one to Chris. This one's directed at you from Randall Brenner. And, Chris mentioned the importance of claims and claims data. Can others on the panel emphasize how this isn't directed at Chris, saw your name there, but I guess, maybe this will be a great question for Clara over at VIA, but, how can others on the panel emphasize how their organizations utilize claims and or claim metrics to drive their business, such as, return to platform?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think that's a great question, and we've been working with the Apollo team quite a bit on obviously understanding our claims and our risk profile, and then in general, I think we have seen a few different phases in the company. The first phase was a very high growth, early stage company a few years ago, trying to limit any potential dollars coming out of the company, and I think that through that phase, we had an okay understanding for our claims, but really tried to limit the dollars coming out of our pocket. Over time, we've turned this just intuitive management of claims into a more organized, systematic claims management system where we have internal meetings with multiple parties within the business, internal tracking, understanding of our claims provision, how much claims out there, and how the claims momentum, how quickly claims are growing, how they're getting multiplied, how they're getting paid over time. And with that, we've been able to, and we're still working through it, with some of you guys and other advisors and partners, and we've been able to figure out our appetite for risk. And I think Chris touched on it. Brian and Andrew, you guys also mentioned that understanding how much risk we're willing to take as we continue to grow is a really important piece of the equation. And I think the claims data and mastering that information is a key part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as well, because I think for a lot of industries and businesses as a whole, insurance and claims management is much, much different than for your guys' lines of business. It's very much so, an integrated part of your overall risk management. And so, like you mentioned, it's interesting how you guys approach it and speak about it on, a much more daily basis than a lot of other businesses. So really appreciate your insight there, Clara. And the next question here, want to direct it towards Brian over at HyreCar. So I know that, there's no secret that you guys are a publicly traded company, and, you guys have listed on the NASDAQ much earlier than a lot of, other mobility companies. Has that proven any unforeseen benefits, challenges, any words of advice for private companies, similar to HyreCar, moving towards and taking the plunge to going public?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I've not worked with a public company before, and I often tell people it's like living in a glass house. Everyone knows your business. So the bright side of it, of course, is the ability to raise capital. And also it keeps you on your toes. I went from basically having, let's say, one boss most of my life to having a few million bosses, investors. So it really, you're always looking for ways to improve the business model while also respecting, of course, investor sentiment. And probably one of the unique things is partnerships, which we talked about earlier, but one I didn't mention. We partnered with a company called FUV, Fun Utility Vehicles. They're also publicly traded, and Arcimoto is their industry name, but they build a EV-based three-wheeled vehicles specifically for package and food delivery. And this is really was spawned out of the fact that they appreciated that we were a public company. So to go back to the fact of what are the benefits of public? Well, you know, when you're doing something new and something that's perceived as risky, there is a bit of confidence that, hey, okay, they're a public company. They're not hiding things in a trash can somewhere. And if they are, they're going to get in trouble. So the relationship with Arcimoto is really exciting because many major cities are closing some of the streets to regular traffic. And food and package delivery is somewhat impacted with larger traditional vehicles. So these EV three-wheeled bikes, which are very low maintenance, they're pretty much the only maintenance would be tires, and those probably would last 50,000 miles, if not more. But they carry somewhere north of 50 pounds of packages. I think it's actually higher. They're great for navigating areas that are typically not available for traditional cars, and they're very economical. So we rent those for about $20 a day, and they're perfect for food and package delivery in the urban areas where streets have closed. And frankly, they're even good where streets aren't closed. They go 65 miles an hour, and they're large enough and small enough to work. But that's because we were a public company and it made them comfortable to do business with us. So it's opened opportunities that others may not have had.
Perfect. No, that's great. That's great, Brian, and appreciate that sentiment. Definitely a lot more eyes on you, but it does come with benefits as well.
Yes.
But one last question for Andrew. I know you mentioned obviously GetAround is primarily in Europe and the US. You know, do you guys have any plans to potentially go to like developing countries or other markets that you see could be beneficial for GetAround?
So I'm happy to answer that question. I think it may have been directed toward Clara. But for our part, we don't have any near-term plans to go into the developing world. But certainly we are always keeping our eyes and ears open about other opportunities, both in the developed as well as the developing world.
And Clara, perfect, Andrew, appreciate that. And Clara, did you have anything to add there?
You know, we have presence in over 20 countries. So some of those countries are developing countries like Brazil or Chile, and we are exploring growing further in developing countries, of course, where we think the technology could have a meaningful impact.
Amazing. Well, I think that's all we have today. I think we're like right on par, and wanted to thank everyone. And if there are any questions that were asked that we weren't able to get to, we'll make sure that those get answered. But really appreciate the panelists' time. I think that this was extremely helpful. I learned a ton. I'm sure the viewers did as well. Really appreciate you guys' time. And it's not, you know, it's interesting, right? You look at, you know, COVID, like you mentioned, Claire, there's a lot of silver linings. And I think, you know, webinars like this weren't happening all the time. And the ability to have you guys on a panel, you know, speaking is truly great. And thank you for allowing us to be the participants. And yeah, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, guys. Take care.